r/AskReddit. Serious. Have you ever watched as someone's world fell apart in a moment? What happened? I was at a friend's parents' house, sitting with her whole family when a friend's sister gets the call that the father of her newborn baby had been crushed to death in a work accident. It was excruciating because there was nothing I could do for her except leave. She didn't know me, and I was extraneous to her situation. Unfortunately, I was 2 hours from home without transportation and had to sit awkwardly in their living room until someone else could pick me up. Similar story for me, kinda. I was spending the night at a friend's house. We were probably around 10 at the time, and early in the AM a cop knocks on the door. His dad was driving home from a night shift and was in a fatal collision with a drunk driver. It must have been so hard watching someone you're close to experiencing that kind of shock and pain. You were so young, too. Most kids aren't prepared to help a friend in that situation. I'm afraid I probably wasn't all that helpful, unfortunately. I think his mom actually had the cops take me home. My mum didn't drive and she had enough on her plate plus was in no condition herself. Loss is something that you just can't articulate as a kid, I think. You aren't wired to process it yet. I don't think anyone ever mentioned it afterward, at school or otherwise. I don't even know if anyone else knew. He had an uncle who liked to drink. If he drove to the bar he handed the bartender his keys and would take a cab, or walk, home if he got drunk. He did that for a while until he lost his license due to another situation. I can't remember what for, but I know it wasn't driving under the influence. Anyway, he finally paid his fines and everything and was gonna get his license back the next day, so he went to the bar to celebrate. Was walking home that night and got ran over by a drunk driver. The cops ended up finding the asshole wrecked in a ditch passed out behind the wheel. He was so tanked he didn't know he ran my uncle over. A witness identified him. My uncle left behind a wife and 2 small children who can barely remember what their daddy looked like, and it about destroyed my father. He was supposed to go to the bar with him but ended up cancelling, so he blames himself, all because of some inconsiderate dick. My grandparents were married for 60 years. I saw a lot of people break completely the day my grandfather passed away. My father and both of his brothers, but most of them all was my grandmother. After a few hours spending time saying goodbye to him as we waited for the mortuary to take him to the funeral home, everyone was saying their final goodbyes to him on the stretcher. My grandma tends to be very calm, cool and collected about her feelings, and I had never seen her cry up until that day. She began to sob over him and say, "I'll see you soon, honey, I'll see you soon." I still get choked up remembering it. My grandparents were married for 63 years when my grandmother died. The only possible silver lining to such a loss was that by that time, my grandfather was fairly deep into his dementia and never much remembered that grandma died. It broke my heart to have him repeatedly ask me whose funeral we were at when his own wife was in the casket feet away. But for the remaining couple of years he had on Earth, in Grandpa's mind, Grandma was always just in the next room, still puttering about in nearby. I'm grateful he had that. I was there when my friend got the news that there had been a shooting at a church a lot of his family went to. He got word it was happening, but only one person had been shot. While devastating, he had been told that no one he knew had been hurt. He then got word that the one person shot was his uncle. They got him to the hospital, but he didn't make it. A similar thing happened to me. My friend goes to the Poway synagogue, and when I heard about the shooting, 3 injured 1 dead, I bolted to my phone and called her. She sounded shaken, but she hadn't gone that day, thank God. She knows people who go there. It's some scary shit. I'm so sorry to hear about his uncle, but I'm happy the rest of his family made it out alive. Had to tell my brother that our dad died. Mom was in the hospital and she let me know there. On the way, I was crying so hard, barely holding it together. When I knocked on his door, the casual "What is it?" greeted me. Dad died. Oh. I closed the door. Went into my room. A few hours later I heard him cry. Broke my heart. I hope you're better. It's very hard to give the news. I hope you don't feel guilty about the man, as I'm sure your brother understands. It's been 9 years since that day. I am better, thank you. We've never been close, so after that day, and us being all alone, we had to learn to work together. Yes. We had to tell my mother my father died. I will never forget that day. It was horrible on all of us, but her reaction was heartbreaking. They got married when they were still teenagers and had been together for 2 months shy of 30 years. It was an on-the-job accident and out of the blue. His workplace called my uncle, mother's brother, dad's best friend, first, and he called all of us. She was the last to find out so we could all be there for her. Even when it's not surprising, it can still be incredibly hard. My grandparents were married since they were I think 17 and 19, maybe 18 and 20. My grandfather died after a 2-year battle with cancer when he was about 67. I've never seen anyone so sad as my grandmother that day. She could only repeat "What will I do now? He's my son" over and over. I had a former co-worker pass suddenly last December. He was only 34 but had been with his wife since they were 18. I and everyone else in my office was invited to the funeral, and most of us went. I'll never forget his wife making a speech and saying that he made her feel like she never had to grow up. They both had great jobs and such, she just meant he made her feel carefree. But then added that now he was gone and she had to grow up and face things alone, especially since they hadn't yet started on their dream of having a family. It was heartbreaking. At a small local store, a truck had reversed and hit a small 10-year-old boy who was scootering past. Ambulance and police everywhere. The boy's mom was right beside the boy and a huge crowd had gathered. The paramedic pronounced him dead after a few moments of struggling and the mom screamed, a real low, deep, pain scream that I can't forget. She got up and walked almost in slow motion, more of a limp, and headed directly towards me. Her eyes were just dead and she just walked aimlessly and I swiftly left the scene. On the flip side, throughout this whole time, the driver of the work truck had locked himself in the car. He did not leave the car the whole time I was there. The mom tried to get into it at one point and the police were around it. The man was in it, just motionless and not responding to anything. I guess that's two worlds that fell apart in that moment. Imagine for a second hearing the paramedics confirm, "Yep, you killed this child." I mean, it would obviously be the end of the world for the mother, but people tend to forget that the person that did this, no matter how little fault they actually are, will always be the person that killed a child. For the rest of their life. I don't think I would be able to live with that knowledge. Woke up early in the morning to get ready for school when I heard the most strange inhumane noise coming outside my room. I walk out and it's dark, but I make out my mom sitting at the dining table with my dad standing over her. The sound was my mom crying. I'd never seen her cry. It was the sound of a heartbreaking. The police had called at 4 a.m. to tell my parents my brother was found dead. Co-worker seemed fine, for the most part, one day, if not a bit stressed. Eventually, toward the end of the day, she gets a call and then sorts of wanders into my and my supervisor's office looking to be half stressed, half out of it, and informs us that her cousin had just been shot by their husband. Apparently, the cousin was going through a brutal divorce and her husband decided to do the worst thing, so he drove over to her home and shot her, before committing suicide himself. Even worse, her parents were visiting and witnessed the entire thing. So she got the news via phone and I wasn't sure what was holding her together as she was talking to us, but she went home soon after. My sister died 3 years ago. When she was in her casket, I don't know how to write it. I watched my dad and other sister holding on it, because my sister was inside. My sister's BF comes, picks her up, and keep her away from the casket for some time. So I went to pick up my dad, take him away so he wouldn't be so depressed. I have never had felt so adult since. My dad hugged me, and I realized how little and old he was, and skinny. I felt like an adult trying to take care of a child. When she was been taken away to be buried, my dad snaps and tries to hold to that wooden thing as his life depends on it. Once again I have to hug him, and listen to him saying, "My little daughter, my baby is dead." It was horrible and I never wished to someone to live a similar situation. I used to work for a cruise line as a host. Translations are a part of the gig. During a cruise going from Rio de Janeiro to Buenos Aires, A lot of Brazilians seemed excited to gamble at the casino. The second day in, the casino host calls me up to translate for a guest. Once I'm there, I see his guy red as a beet. Turns out he didn't understand the concept of international waters and brought all his savings on board to gamble. He thought he had found a loophole, that he could do it, and if he lost he'd just sue the company for gambling in Brazilian territory, which seems like it's illegal, and get his money back plus a bonus, because movies. After a lengthy explanation on international waters and how casinos work, he broke down, began crying and begging us to give him some money back, that it was all he had from over 20 years of savings that he for when he got old, around 200k give or take with the currency exchange. He said his wife would leave him and take his daughters if she found out he gambled it all away in a single night. Over the period of a 7 days cruise, he'd come to me and repeat the same scene every single day, ranging from crying and begging for at least a small refund to angrily threatening to kill himself by jumping from the back of the ship, making sure I knew it would be my fault alone. Last day came in, I was told by the security office that his wife left him alone at the terminal and he was wailing there. It was a sad week all around.